The numbers matched on a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow, like winning $40 million should require a more dramatic day of the week. You were standing in a gas station off Route 9, buying the ticket on the same impulse you always did, the $1.50 tax on gas you were already paying for, and you checked it against your phone in the parking lot because you always checked in the parking lot, out of some superstition you never examined. 6 numbers. All 6. You read them 3 times before your hand started shaking, and the strange thing nobody tells you about winning is that the first feeling isn't joy. It's fear, immediate and total, the specific fear of a person who suddenly has something everyone around them might want. You don't tell anyone that night. You sit in your car in the gas station parking lot for 40 minutes with the engine running, doing math you've never had a reason to do, lump sum versus annuity, tax brackets you didn't know existed, and somewhere in that 40 minutes you make a decision that will define the next 18 months more than the winning itself. You decide to tell people slowly. You don't know yet that money this size doesn't wait for permission to travel. You drive home a different way than usual, longer, through neighborhoods you don't normally pass, and you catch yourself looking at houses differently, not with envy anymore but with a strange, dislocated curiosity, like you're already trying on a version of your life you haven't earned the right to imagine yet. You don't sleep that night. You lie awake running the same 6 numbers through your head, over and over, half convinced you'll wake up and discover you misread one of them. Your girlfriend is the first person you tell, 2 days later, after you've already met with a lawyer who specializes in exactly this, a man whose entire practice exists for people who walked into a gas station and walked out into a different life. She cries, and you cry, and for about 6 hours it's the purest version of the news you'll ever get to have, before anyone else's math gets involved in yours. Your mother is next, and her first question isn't about the number, it's about whether you're going to quit your job, and you realize she's not asking out of curiosity, she's asking because your father's pension has been the subject of a decade of quiet worry between them, and something in her voice tells you the relief arriving in her chest is bigger than anything you're feeling in yours. You tell her yes, you're quitting, and you hear her exhale in a way you've never heard her exhale before. Your brother finds out the way brothers find out things, secondhand, through your mother, 3 days after you told her, and he calls you sounding hurt in a way that surprises you, not about the money, about the sequence. Why did Mom know before me? You don't have a good answer. You tell him you were still processing it, which is true, and also not the reason, and he lets it go, but it's the first small crack, the first indication that money doesn't just arrive in your life, it rearranges the order everyone thought they stood in. He asks, near the end of the call, almost too casually, what you're planning to do with it, and you tell him you haven't decided, which is true, and he goes quiet for a second before saying, well, you know I've got that truck loan still hanging over me, in a tone that's trying so hard to sound like an offhand comment that it becomes the opposite. You don't address it directly. Neither does he. It just sits there, unspoken, the first of what will become a very long list of things people mention without quite asking. The claim itself is almost anticlimactic, a fluorescent-lit office, forms, a photograph you'll see reprinted for months afterward, your own face looking shell-shocked next to an oversized check that exists only for the camera. You chose the lump sum, minus taxes. Minus the lawyer's cut, minus the financial advisor you hired on his recommendation, and the number that actually lands in an account with your name on it is smaller than the headline, though still larger than anything anyone in your family has ever seen attached to one person. The lawyer walks you through a structure designed specifically to slow the whole process down, a trust, an LLC to hold certain assets, layers between your name and the money that he says exist for privacy as much as tax reasons. You nod along, understanding maybe half of what he explains, and he tells you something you'll think about often in the months ahead. The paperwork isn't really about hiding the money, he says. It's about buying you time to figure out who you actually are before everyone else decides for you. Your best friend since college, a man named Marcus who was at your wedding, who you were at his wedding for, calls within a week, genuinely happy for you, no ask, just noise and excitement and a plan to celebrate. You go out that weekend and it's the best night of the entire process, the last one, though you don't know that yet, where the money is just a fact about your life instead of a variable in the relationship. The first ask comes from an uncle you haven't spoken to in 3 years, a business opportunity, He calls it a restaurant franchise that can't lose, and you say no, gently, and he goes quiet in a way that tells you the no landed as something other than a simple no. Word travels. You don't post anything, you don't tell strangers, but somehow within a month it feels like everyone within 2 degrees of your actual life knows the number, rounded up slightly in the retelling the way numbers always are. Marcus asks you for money in month 3, and this is the one that actually costs you something, because he doesn't ask like the uncle did, transactional and distant. He asks like a friend, over beers, almost embarrassed, a business he's wanted to start for years. A real plan, he says, and he shows you a deck on his phone that's 80% enthusiasm and 20% numbers. You give him $60,000, not as a loan exactly, though you both call it that, because saying no to Marcus feels like a different kind of loss than saying no to an uncle you barely know. For a while it works, the way these things always work for a while. Marcus texts you updates, photos of a rented storefront, a logo, momentum. You feel good about it, genuinely, the specific good feeling of having used the money for something other than yourself. You start believing the money didn't change anything between you two. It got tested, you tell yourself, and it held. The business fails in month 6, quietly, the way most small businesses fail, not a dramatic collapse but a slow bleeding out of a lease he can't make, inventory he overordered, a location that never got the foot traffic the deck promised. Marcus doesn't call to tell you it's over. You find out from someone else, the same way your brother found out about the winnings, secondhand, and when you finally reach him, he doesn't apologize for the money. He tells you he's thinking about asking for more, just to get through the transition, and something in the way he says it, transition, tells you he's already decided you're going to say yes. You ask him, as gently as you can manage, why he didn't call you the moment things started going wrong, back in month 4 when the numbers first slipped, and he goes quiet for a while before admitting he didn't want you to think he'd wasted it. That sentence sits with you longer than almost anything else in the entire process, because you realize the money didn't just change what Marcus asked you for, it changed what he was willing to tell you, and a friendship that used to survive on total honesty started quietly filtering itself the moment a number got involved. You say no this time, your first real no of the entire process. And it changes something between you permanently. Not a fight, nothing loud enough to be called a fight. Just silence, calls that stop coming, a friendship of 15 years that goes quiet over $60,000 that was never really about the $60,000 at all. You spend a week replaying the wedding toast he gave you, trying to figure out which version of him was real, the one who cried giving that toast or the one who stopped calling over a number that changed nothing about how much either of you actually had left in the friendship. Your girlfriend notices you pulling inward around month 7, becoming quieter at dinners with her family, slower to answer texts from people you used to answer immediately. She asks you directly one night whether the money is making you happy, and you sit with the question longer than you expect to, because the honest answer is complicated in a way you didn't anticipate when you were sitting in that gas station parking lot doing math. You tell her you don't know yet. She says that's the first honest thing you've said about any of it in months, and she's right, and you both know it. The extended family requests keep coming, cousins you've met twice, a nephew's college fund, a family friend's medical bill that arrives with photos attached like evidence, like you need convincing that suffering exists. You start saying no more, and each no costs less than the last one, not because you care less, but because you're learning that the requests were never actually about need, most of them, they were about access, about being close enough to someone with money to get a piece of the proximity. You start keeping a private list, never shown to anyone, of who asked and who didn't, and it becomes the most honest document you've ever kept about your own family. The cousin you were closest to growing up asks twice, once directly and once through your mother when the first attempt didn't land. The cousin you barely spoke to for a decade never asks at all. Just sends a card when the news broke, genuinely happy, no mention of numbers, and you find yourself calling him more often now than you have in 15 years, precisely because he never once treated the money like an opening. Your father, who has said almost nothing about the entire situation since the beginning, takes you fishing in month 9, the first time in years he suggested it without your mother arranging it first. You sit in the boat for 3 hours and he doesn't mention the money once, doesn't ask for anything, doesn't offer advice about investments the way everyone else has started to. He just asks if you're doing okay, plainly, the way he used to ask when you were a teenager and something was clearly wrong that you weren't saying out loud. You almost cry in the boat. You don't, but you almost do, because it's the first conversation in 9 months that hasn't had the money sitting in it like an uninvited third person. Near the end of the day, reeling in a line that's caught nothing all afternoon, he tells you, without much preamble, that he turned down a loan from his own brother once, decades ago, when your father was young and broke and proud, and he's regretted the pride ever since, though not the decision itself. Money and family were never supposed to share a bank account, he says, and you don't fully understand what he means until months later, replaying the sentence after everything with Marcus has already happened. By month 12, you've stopped telling new people entirely. Not out of secrecy exactly, out of exhaustion. You watch acquaintances' faces change in a half-second after they find out, a recalibration you've learned to recognize instantly, the same look the uncle gave you, the same look Marcus gave you right before the ask, a brief mental filing of you into a different category of person. You start testing people without telling them you're testing them, mentioning nothing about the money for weeks. Watching who stays curious about your actual life anyway. Your girlfriend passes every version of that test without knowing she's taking it, and somewhere around month 14 you propose, not because of the money, in spite of it almost, because she's the one person in the entire process who never once asked what the number could do for her specifically. She says yes in a restaurant you picked specifically because it has nothing to do with any of this, and for one night, the money disappears entirely from the conversation, the way it used to before any of this started. Planning the wedding becomes its own small education in who people actually are. Her parents, meeting you properly for the first time since the news broke, spend the entire dinner asking about your job history, your hobbies, whether you're a morning person, questions so ordinary you almost want to laugh with relief. Your own extended family, by contrast, spends the engagement party circling the topic of a destination wedding they can't quite afford themselves, hinting at flights and hotel blocks in a way that makes you quietly decide, before you've even set a date, exactly how small this wedding is going to be. The wedding, when it happens in month 16, is smaller than either of you expected to want, and you notice, reading the guest list a final time, how many names from a year ago simply aren't on it anymore, not through any fight, just a quiet erosion of people who turned out to be adjacent to your life rather than inside it. Marcus isn't there. You think about inviting him for a long time and don't, because you're not sure which version of him would show up, and you've learned, this year, that not knowing the answer to that question is itself the answer. By month 18, the friend group that's left is smaller and stranger than the one you started with, built less around history and more around a specific kind of restraint, people who know about the money. And have simply never once brought it up unprompted, in either direction. You realize, sitting at your own kitchen table with your wife 18 months after a gas station parking lot, that you thought the hard part of winning would be managing the money. Nobody warned you the actual hard part was managing the 20 different versions of yourself that other people were suddenly willing to see. You still have the original ticket, laminated now, in a drawer you rarely open, next to a photograph of a fluorescent-lit office and an oversized check that exists only because a camera needed something to point at. Somewhere tonight, someone is standing in a gas station parking lot with a phone in one hand and a ticket in the other, about to find out that money doesn't test the people around you. It just removes the cost of finding out who they always were. You are the same person you were before the numbers matched. The only thing that changed is how many people needed you to prove it. Marcus reaches out once more, almost 2 years later, a short message with no ask attached, just a birthday text, the kind he used to send before any of this, and you sit with your phone for a long time deciding whether to answer. You do, eventually, something brief and warm and careful, and neither of you mentions the $60,000 or the silence that followed it. You don't know if the friendship is salvageable or if this is just two people being polite about something neither of you knows how to name. But you answer, because somewhere underneath all of it, you remember the version of him who cried at your wedding, and some part of you still wants to believe that version was real too.